Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I always find this very strange to sit in front of a group of people I can't see. But to those who don't know me, my name is Tanja Müller. I'm Professor of Political Sociology at the Global Development Institute here in Manchester, and also a founding director of HCRI back in the day. It's my very great pleasure to welcome Professor Munzoul Assal back in Manchester, even if only virtually, unfortunately. Professor Munzoul is Professor of Social Anthropology at the University of Khartoum, and currently he's also a scholar at risk at the Chr Michelsen Institute in Norway, and he's also affiliated as a professor with the University of Bergen. Professor Munzoul's research focuses on migration, refugees, internally displaced people, and peace building. His books include 50 Years of Anthropology in Sudan, Past, Present, and Future, which he co-edited with Musa Abdul Jalil, Multidimensional Change in Sudan, 1989 to 2011, Reshaping Livelihoods, Conflicts, and Identities, and also Borderlands Dynamics in East Africa, Cases from Ethiopia, Sudan, and Uganda, also co-edited volume. Professor Munzoul was member of the Board of Trustees of the Arab Council for Social Sciences from 2015 to 2023, and is now an honorary fellow at the Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. Actually, when we started HCRI, one of our first big events was a two-day seminar in May 2010 on Darfur. And Professor Munzoul was with us in person in Manchester then, and one of the key speakers. And it was a really nice event. I very vividly remember the full lecture hall at University Place, Lecture Theatre A, and the engaged discussions. And a lot of people from the Sudanese and Darfuri community, particularly in the UK, joined us for that event. I actually last met Professor Munzoul in Khartoum in November 2022 in relation to a project of my own in the Horn of Africa, where we held a dissemination workshop in Khartoum. And actually then, quite shortly before everything fell apart, it was really hard to imagine that this would actually happen in such a near future in many ways. So it's a really, really great honor for me to chair this webinar, and I really warmly welcome Professor Munzoul. He'll speak for about 40 minutes on the current political and humanitarian situation in Sudan, and then we open up for Q&A. And for this, we will ask you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, the one with the question mark, and post your contribution directly, and I'll then read them out, but also everybody can see them. I should also mention this webinar is being recorded, and Professor Munzoul has agreed to that. And as we can't see you, and as your questions will also be anonymous, we assume this is okay for everybody who joins, but Andrew from the HCRI team will be back after the recording to sort of confirm that this is okay with you. So without further ado, I hand over the floor to Professor Munzoul.
Thank you very much, Tanja, for the warm welcome and the kind words. I would have loved to be in Manchester in person, but perhaps some other time. And indeed, time flies. I can't believe that it was 2010 that I was there in Manchester. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the audience, for those who made it to be with us. I'll try to be brief. Normally I don't talk a lot. I tend to give space for people to ask and interact. But let me try to walk you through what I wanted to say. Now, as you can see in the screen, the title of my talk would be Sudan from Revolution to Disaster. And I will start by just a bit of history, because we will not be able to understand the current disaster if we don't look at our history. Sudan has a very interesting history. It got its independence from the UK in 1956. And then it experienced short-lived democratic governments. We had three short-lived democratic governments. The first one was from 56 to 58, and then 64 to 69, and then 86 to 89. And we had long military dictatorships. The first one was 1958 until 64. And then we had a longer one from 69 to 85. And then we had the Bashir regime, which started 1989 and until 2019. And this shows that the military has been quite central in Sudan politics. It was actually quite dominant. And of course, the longest military dictatorship was the one of Omar Bashir, which was backed by the Islamists, that came to power in June 1989. And then this history, which is characterized by domination of dictatorships and kleptocracy, but also civilians had their share in what was happening in the country. I don't think we should put all the blame on the military alone, because if you look closely at all these military coup or the unconstitutional seizure of power, we will find out that civilians were behind it. Actually, even the first military coup of General Aboud in 1958, it was said that one of the political parties invited the military to take power. The second military dictatorship of Jafar Nimeri was also backed by civilians, the Sudanese Communist Party, in response to their expulsion from the parliament in 1965. And then the last one of Bashir was supported by the Islamists. We all know this. So civilians had their share in the turbulent political history of the country. And I think we need to take this into consideration when we talk about the political setbacks that Sudan has been going through since 1956. There is also the element of oscillation between blocs. Sudan has never been stable when it comes to its foreign relations and foreign policy. And we have seen this during the Meri, and we have seen this also clearly during Bashir, during the 30 years of his rule. Now, when Bashir was removed in 2019, there was a military-civilian partnership, which was a result of the so-called Constitutional Declaration that was arrived at through the work that was done by the IGAD and the Ethiopian Prime Minister, who mediated between the civilians represented by the Forces for Freedom and Change and the Transition Military Council at the time. And they arrived at the Constitutional Declaration in August 2019 that led to the formation of the transition government, which was a power sharing arrangement between the military and the civilians. The cabinet was manned by civilians, and the Sovereign Council was shared between civilians and the military. And although those who were part of the transition tried to tell the Sudanese people and the world that the partnership we are having is a good one, it's working, but the fact of the matter is that we had a very shaky transition. The civilians and the military looked like they are strange bedfellows. In fact, they are, or they were. Civilian-military bickering all the time, military rivalry between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, civilian figures. We all saw the problems within the Forces for Freedom and Change and also within the Sudanese Professional Association. These two being the spearheading civilian bodies that led the uprisings that led to the collapse of Bashir's regime. But when they entered into the transitional government, we saw that there are a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And of course, we also know very well that the former regime was working very hard to sabotage the transition by creating problems, when it comes to basic services. They blocked the only port in the country for a few months, and that led to putting a lot of pressure on the cabinet, which was led by Abdullah Hamdok. And all this was a build-up to the October 2021 military coup, where the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces conspired again with some civilian elements represented by allied groups of the former regime, and also the signatories of the so-called Juba Peace Agreement, to orchestrate the military coup, first by organizing the so-called palace sit-in, calling for the military to take over. And as a matter of fact, 2 weeks after the start of the palace sit-in, the military seized power in October 25th to 2021, dissolving the cabinet, arresting the prime minister and his cabinet members, and repressing peaceful demonstrators. As a matter of fact, a lot of people were killed. And the number of people who were killed was actually, I think, bigger than the number killed during the demonstrations that preceded the ousting of the former regime. So troubles within the transitional government, on the one hand between the military and civilians, on the other hand between the military and the military, and on the other also between civilians and civilians, led to a very weak transitional government, and eventually the government was dissolved by the Sudan Armed Forces and the rebel support forces. They conspired against the transition and they took power. Now, what happened after October 2021 was a very difficult situation whereby the Sudanese people, especially young women and men, were taken to the streets every day. They were repressed, they were arrested, they were killed, they were harassed, and Sudan was back again to the evil cycle of repressing peaceful demonstrators, of shrinking the public space for people who express their views peacefully. And it was becoming very difficult for the Sudanese people at a time when there were high hopes, that Sudanese people got rid of a long dictatorship, and now it's time to transition to democracy where justice, peace, and liberties, where freedoms will prevail. But unfortunately, all these hopes are shattered first by the coup, and eventually and logically by the April war that started on the 15th of April 2023. Now, there are a lot of competing narratives about what happened in April 2023. The Sudan Armed Forces look at or interpret what happened was as a mutiny on the side of the rebel support forces who wanted to seize power. They look at it as a coup attempt that went wrong. The rebel support forces, from its part, says that this is a war that was started by the Islamists. They are the one who went and attacked the rebel support forces in the sports city in the southern parts of Khartoum. This is at the very beginning of the war, the first days. There were all these different positions, different narratives about it. And then, of course, as the war escalates and develops, then other narratives got into the stage also, including that this is a war orchestrated by the so-called diaspora Arabs who want to take over the country and resettle Arabs in Sudan, and a lot of things. I don't have time to go through all this, but what this reflects is a very divided country, that people are unable to have a shared understanding about what's going on. And I think this is one of the factors that are complicating the situation. Now, this war is very different from all the previous wars that were fought in the country, because this is the first time that the war is fought at the very heart of the country, the capital. All the previous wars were fought in the peripheries. This one started right at the center. This war completely obliterated the middle class because Khartoum is a seat of power, but it's also where the Sudanese middle class is based. And this war really hit the middle class very hard. And this is also one of the things that explains the complexity of this war and the failure of the Sudanese people to come to grip with the narrative and to contribute positively to stopping the war. Third, this war also, as opposed to all the previous wars, witnessed destruction of infrastructure and properties. There is a wide-scale destruction of public properties, private properties, homes. Hundreds of thousands of homes were destroyed through the shelling, through air bombing. And there is a widespread looting. That's also characteristic of this war, as opposed to all the previous wars. We have seen this. The rapid support forces, whenever they occupy a place, the first thing they will do is to loot. And then others who take advantage of this kind of situation will finish the rest. So this is a war that is different from all the previous wars. It's quite complicated. It's getting complicated by the day. The longer it takes, or the longer it continues, the more complicated it gets. Now, this is a war that has resulted in one of the most disastrous humanitarian situations in the world. If you look at the numbers of those who are displaced internally and those who found their way into neighboring countries, we're talking about 13 million Sudanese uprooted, 10 inside the country, and 3 found their ways to neighboring countries in Chad, in Egypt, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and further afield. And the numbers are actually difficult to come to grips with because they are changing all the time. When it comes to those who are killed, nobody knows. I think what we have are just guessing or speculations, because neither SAF nor the rapid support forces report the death numbers. They don't. And even the deaths among the civilian population is also difficult to get to an accurate figure because of the volatile situation and of the fact that people are being killed by the minute, So we are having a very difficult situation in the country. And this is actually not only for the Sudanese, it's for everybody else. Those who are trying to support also are finding it quite difficult to do something sensible. Now, there are a lot of questions of the sort: what are the pro-democracy groups? What are those who were instrumental in the political change that took place in 2019? And what role do they have at the present time? Unfortunately, the society has been polarized in a very serious manner. When this war started, the country has already been divided. Civilians are divided among themselves. They don't speak with one voice. And unfortunately, some of the civilians are sucked into the conflict by siding to either party, either supporting Sudan forces or supporting the rapid support forces. And this is one of the complicating factors. And until the civilians come to the understanding that war is an absolute evil and that it should stop, we are going to see a lot of suffering, and we're going to witness a more disastrous humanitarian situation. Now, looking at the regional and international dimensions and mediation efforts, I think we can also see that little has been done and little has been achieved. And of course, I can cite a lot of factors as to why these international regional mediation efforts are not fruitful. Again, this has internal and external dimensions. Internally, the country has been suspended from the African Union after the October 2021 military coup, which means that the African Union has very little leverage on the situation in the country. In January this year, Sudan unilaterally decided to suspend its membership in the IGAD, again rendering IGAD ineffective. And if we understand the nature of IGAD, which is a club of heads of states, a head of a state can have a veto on whatever the IGAD does, and the IGAD cannot do anything. And that's why we don't really see any meaningful engagement of the African Union and the IGAD in the disaster that's going on in Sudan. The most credible attempt to do something about the crisis is the Saudi and American mediation, which was started in May 2023 in Jeddah and came to be known as the Jeddah Platform. We have seen that there were attempts to get into a ceasefire, and I think there were two documents that were signed in the 11th of May and the 20th of May 2023, but those documents were just documents. They were not implemented, and the situation kept deteriorating. And formally, the Jeddah platform is stopped since October 2023. That was the last time the Saudis and the Americans were able to bring the rebel support forces and Sudan armed forces to negotiate, even if indirectly. In August this year, the Saudis and the Americans invited the parties to come to Geneva for talks. And I think all of you have been following, or at least heard about this, that the Sudan government boycotted the Geneva talks, arguing that the first step that should be done is to implement the Jeddah Accords that were signed in May 2023 as a basis for any negotiations with the rebel forces. And of course, that led to the failure of Geneva. Now, parallel to this regional international mediation efforts, there are also some Sudanese civilians who attempted to do something, and here I'm talking about the Coalition for Forces for Democratic or CCFD, that is the Taqaddum, which was formed in October 2023, and Taqaddum met with the rebel support forces early this year, I think January 2nd, in Ethiopia, where they signed some sort of a document with the rebel support forces. And the idea at the time was to meet with the Sudan armed forces and also sign a similar document by way of attempting to stop the war. But of course, we all saw the implication of Taqaddum signing the document with the rebel support forces. It's been demonized. It's been seen as a political wing of the rebel support forces, and all of that, and leaders of this coalition are now targeted by the Sudan judiciary by issuing arrest warrant against the members of Taqaddum. And again, this tells you the extent to which the Sudanese political class is polarized, is shattered, and they cannot come to grip with what's going on. This is another complicating factor. And instead of working on ways and means to build a broad-based civilian coalition that is capable of putting an end to the war, we see polarization extending to the political arena. You know, the SAF and the Rapid Support Forces are fighting the military battle, but there are also other battles that are fought, and all these feed into each other to complicate the situation. Now, of course, the humanitarian situation is quite disastrous. We all know or have an idea about what's going on, although the international community's attention is not really focused on Sudan as such. We all know that the much attention was given to Ukraine and Gaza, and now Syria, of course, over the past few days is another front that is hot. And this means that less attention will continue to be accorded to the country. Now, for us, I think one of the things that we need to take into consideration is the necessity and importance of looking beyond the humanitarian disaster. Because what we are seeing are the consequences of a lot of things that have been happening for a long time, including the short history that I just started my talk with. Now, what has been going on since the start of the war is the fact that the war is increasingly becoming ethnicized. And this is something that entrenches divisions that are already there in the Sudanese society. The widespread looting and violence, including sexual violence by the Rapid Support Forces, and the indiscriminate bombing and ethnic profiling by SAF, all these are deepening the crisis and feeding into the escalation of the war. And because we all know that the Rapid Support Forces loot, kill, they perpetrate violence indiscriminately. And I don't think anybody should have any illusion about this, because these Rapid Support Forces are trained to do this. They have done this 20 years ago and continue to do it. Anyway, the Sudan Armed Forces, unfortunately, is going through the same direction, and there is no justification whatsoever to bomb civilians like what happens in Al-Kuma, in Al-Fashir, in Niyala, in Kapkabia. They're just killing people, not the Rapid Support Forces. And I think this is something that needs to be condemned, you know, because this is something that is going to deepen ethnic hostilities, which are already there, you know. Now, the sad part of all this is that, you know, the people who are enlightened, the people who are supposed to you know, to be looked at as the wise people, the educated, unfortunately, they are not doing what they are supposed to do. And instead of embracing wisdom and trying to work something out so that this nightmare ends, we see the spread of hate speech. If you look at the Sudanese social media pages, it's a very sad reality. It's really sad reality, you know. And the potential of the educated and the middle class, you know, of spearheading tolerance, you know, and contributions to stop the war is turned to its antithesis, you know. We only hear you know, voices of victimization, voices of you know, it's very sad. It's really sad that we become amenable to polarization, you know. And one of the sad realities of what's happening in the country is that the voices of those who adopt this very exclusivist stance is quite harassing and forces people to take sides. If you say no to war, you will be accused of supporting the rebel support forces. If you support the army, then you will be categorized as you are an Islamist, you know. And it's really sad that people are forced to take sides. To me, as an academic, the Sudan armed forces and the rebel support forces are evils. I say this all the time. But perhaps one is more evil than the other. But it's still they are evils. And I think the Sudanese people should not be forced to choose between one evil and the other. Unfortunately, we lost as an educated class the ability to speak out, you know, candidly and to condemn violence regardless of its source. Now, amid this madness, the work of the first respondents and emergency rooms is lost. We have a lot of young women and men in the country who are still there responding to the disaster that's happening. In the emergency rooms, they are providing food to those who need food and all of that. But unfortunately, the voice of war and destruction overshadows the good work that these people are doing. And my last bit before I stop is to say that counting the dead would not save lives. Of course, this is, I'm not saying that we should not count, but there are a lot of other things that we need to do. It is important to look at the situation beyond numbers, to address the kind of polarization I'm talking about, the kind of hate speech that perpetuates violence and war. We also have to condemn violence regardless of its source. And I think this is the only way that would save us from being polarized or you know, taking sides. Saving lives and serving survivors, of course, this is what humanity is all about. And I think what is being done is really not enough so far. And we see that the Sudanese in Chad are facing a lot of problems. They are not even served enough food. We see similar problems with the Sudanese in Egypt. Uganda perhaps provides a ray of hope, at least when it comes to speeding the processes for refugees. And I think there is a need for more effort to stop the war. For me, as a Sudanese, I feel that what has been done hitherto is really not enough by all these stakeholders, Sudanese and others. I think there is a need to do more to confront the disastrous situation in the country. Thank you very much. I will stop here and I'd be glad to interact with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Munzoul, for this very comprehensive, even so slightly depressing presentation of events in Sudan. So before I turn to the Q&A, I actually have a question for you. I mean, I found it very interesting that sort of you really said there's also a failure of the middle class and intellectuals to speak out. People choose sides, but people also have really been destroyed by events. I just wonder, on one specific group, what your view on that is. I mean, as you know, during the revolution, there were these revolutionary committees who started to organize in neighborhoods, and some of them now reorganize in exile in different countries of the region. I was just wondering whether you see that there is something they could up their game and make a better contribution maybe towards this objective to eventually stop the war. And I have a second question that relates in general to what type of violence maybe the international community is willing to accept these days. I mean, I do fear a little bit because, I mean, Sudan, as you rightly said, has been so under-reported, under-engaged with. But I also think if you look at the war in Gaza, the Israeli narrative has really, even though it also has its opposition, it has also got a lot of traction that actually to go behind so-called terrorists, it has become more and more, seems to have become more acceptable to also have many more civilian casualties than was ever before. And even so, there is some pushback from the UN and the international community. It doesn't seem to be very successful to me. And I just wonder whether events like the war in Gaza and its violence also contributes to making a lot of violence also against civilians much more acceptable than it used to be in the past. So if you could maybe just briefly say something about that, and then I will start to read the comments that are started to be posted by our audience. And if I can just remind the audience, if you have a question, if you put it in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and I will then just read this out, and but also everybody, I think, can see it, and then ask Professor Munzoul to respond.
Thank you, Tanja. I think I will just respond to your two questions and then wait for the rest. I think with your question about where are the youth or the resistance committees that used to be doing a good job. The war has really affected everybody. Now, some of these resistance committees are still in the country. They are becoming the emergency respondents and emergency rooms. Others were forced to leave the country for fear of their lives. And this limited their capacity, because when you become a refugee or when you are forced to leave the country, then you get into a new reality of its own that you are forced to deal with. And it takes time for you to organize yourself or to come together, and then you try to do something. Those inside the country are actually working under very difficult conditions, and there are reports that they are targeted by the rebel support forces, and they are also targeted by the Sudan armed forces, where when they take over a place, then they normally arrest people and a lot of difficulties and inconveniences. But still, I think they are doing a good job. Now, I agree with you on your remark about Gaza, that the level of atrocities and violence in Gaza perhaps made the world more tolerant with violence. Unfortunately, this is my reading, and I agree with you that the level of violence in Gaza was so horrendous that perhaps other types of violence were tolerated. Maybe the one in Sudan is among the ones that are not really receiving the attention that they should receive.
Thank you, Professor Munzoul. So I will start with the first question. It's actually two questions that were posted in the chat. So the first of those two is, how have interventions by regional powers affected the peace process and efforts towards political stability in Sudan? And related to that, how can regional cooperation be improved to support peace building and conflict resolution in Sudan?
Well, thank you very much. I think the problem is that the actors, whether regional or international, don't speak with one voice. They have different perspectives, they have different interests, and that is why we don't have a unified platform. The very fact that we have different platforms, we have the IGAD, we have the African Union, we have the Saudi American Jeddah platform, we have the neighboring countries initiative led by Egyptian President Sisi. All these tell you that the international community, including the regional actors, are not speaking with one voice. And I think this is something that's complicating the war in the country. And of course, the Sudan Armed Forces is getting backing from some countries. The Rapid Support Forces is getting backing from some countries. And that is how it is now.
A follow-up question on regional influence is, do you have any opinion on the UAE's influence on stopping the conflict in Sudan?
Well, the UAE definitely, there's no question about that, because what we know is that the leader of the Rapid Support Forces lives in the UAE. His movements are facilitated by the UAE. The former prime minister is in the UAE. And not only that, by the way, even Sudan government depends financially on the UAE, because most of the financial transactions, clearing the international transactions for Sudan is done through the United Arab Emirates. So the UAE is not only influencing the Rapid Support Forces, even the government of Sudan. That is what explains the reluctance of the government of Sudan to sever relations with the UAE, because that would be a disastrous decision to do. So the United Arab Emirates actually is having leverage over everybody, not only Sudan and the Rapid Support Forces, but even the neighboring countries. We all know this. So it has to I think there is a need to push the United Arab Emirates to play a more positive role in the conflict in the country.
And I will stay with the theme of outside influence. So a follow-up question is, in relation to the need for more effort at ending the war, what actions could countries like the UK do to help to achieve that objective, in your opinion?
Well, I firmly believe that the actors, and the UK is definitely one of them, because UK is part of the so-called Troika, that includes the United States and Norway. They played a very important role in the Comprehensive Peace Agreement of 2005, and they played a role also in the Juba Peace Agreement that was signed in October 2020. My belief is that these actors, like the UK and the US and Norway and others, are not really doing enough, are not pushing enough for a peaceful settlement of the conflict. They're not pushing the Sudan Armed Forces, they're not pushing the Rapid Support Forces. And again, this is something that relates to competing interests and the fact that many of these powerful countries are doing politics through proxies. Now, the US, I am one of those who have been saying publicly all the time that what is happening in the country is part of how the US policy is implemented in the Middle East. The US policy is implemented through proxies. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Qatar to some extent. We have to be very clear about this. I don't think much of what these countries are doing is possible if the US is not giving the green light. I may be blunt here, but that is what I feel. The US cannot compromise its relationship with Egypt or the UAE for the sake of the Sudanese people. This is not going to happen. And you have to realize this.
Thank you. So I'll take two questions together now. The first saying, there's a lot of press regarding other events like Gaza or Ukraine. Why the silence on Sudan? And somebody else chips in on that and says, what can we as a student community maybe do to help raise further awareness of the conflict in Sudan?
I think there is much that there is a lot of space actually for people to contribute something. And in the age of the digital media, it's always easy to organize events, to hashtags and all of that. And I think young people are actually quite smart in doing this sort of campaigns that can make a difference. And I think every little counts, you know. So if there is any possibility for a student to paste on their social media pages something about Sudan, I think this would be a contribution.
Thank you. And now I will turn to our old friend Bertrand, who is also in the audience. So Bertrand, thank you, Professor Munzoul. It seems a long time since we last met in Addis, which is true. Yes, we were also together in Addis. I'd forgotten that. You mentioned that the conflict has become more ethnicized. Could you please tell us how it happened and who are the key beneficiaries of this polarization?
Well, to start with, Sudan is a very diverse country, ethnically, linguistically, even climatically. And what happened was that during the Darfur war that started 2003, the government used militias that belong to certain ethnic groups in Darfur as a counter-insurgency strategy. Now, in this war, the government is allying with those that it fought back in the days in Darfur against the rebel support forces. And these belong to other ethnic groups. Now, the serious development is that the Sudan armed forces and the government discourse is that it looks as some of the ethnic groups as incubators of the rebel support forces. And that's why there is an attitude of revenge and punishment that these people, because they support the rebel support forces, we have to punish them, you know? At the same time, the rebel support forces is doing the same and even worse. We have seen what happened in Guinea in July last year. The massacres that happened against the Masali. So all sides are playing this very dangerous card. And I tend to blame the institution, the government, the Sudan armed forces, because they are supposed to be doing better than what they are doing. You know, targeting people based on ethnicity is going to further complicate the situation and make people angry, you know. It's absolutely okay to target the rebel support forces, but what's happening is not the case, you know. We're talking about hundreds of people who just get killed because of the unguided bombings by the Air Force, you know. So all these things will further divide people who are already divided.
Thank you. So another participant asked, Professor Munzoul said the voices of the groups on the ground are lost. Are they lost or are they rather ignored or sidelined is the question.
They are suppressed. They are suppressed because at the moment, if you are inside the country, it's quite difficult. It's actually impossible for you to stand and say that this war should stop because you will be accused of being a traitor. You might be actually in trouble. And unfortunately, the voices of those who are calling for the continuation of war is getting louder and louder, and that is why the situation looks quite scary, quite gloomy actually.
Then we have a question from Mohammed Ibrahim, who says, I'm a Sudanese humanitarian worker, currently in Al-Fasher in North Darfur. We have witnessed horrible massacres has been committed by both warring parties. People here are dying, but does Dr. Munzoul see any possible solution to this suffering to end in the near future?
I really hope, but it's difficult for us who are academics or those people who don't belong to or subscribe to any political orientation. For us, or for me at least, I have always been saying that this war should stop, now. And then we look at the rest of the political process. But this suffering should stop. But there are people who say otherwise. They say that we will continue this war until we finish the last soldier from the rebel support forces. And of course, the rebel support forces also say that we will finish the so-called 1956 country. They call Sudan the 56th country, that we have to dismantle it. And this discourse is not helping, and is polarizing the society. And one of the worries I entertain in that we will probably end up into a scenario either like what's happening in Libya, we have two governments, or worse still, we might see some sort of cessation, although this is highly unlikely and it's quite difficult. But that is also not far from the table.
Thank you. Then we have a question about the incoming US administration. How do you see the change of the US administration affect peacekeeping or peacemaking in Darfur?
Well, I am one of those who don't believe in differences between the Democrats and the Republicans when it comes to foreign policy. There might be a difference, but it's not really very significant. I don't see any significant changes for the new administration, or at least positive changes when it comes to Sudan. As a matter of fact, I am quite pessimistic. They might be even worse, because we all know that it was during Trump that the so-called Abraham Accords were signed, and Sudan was part of that, and the UAE was instrumental. So Trump might actually give the UAE, an additional hand in what it's doing, and I think the US concern is much more on the side of the Middle East and Israel than what's happening in Sudan. So I don't feel we should expect a lot, not positively.
Thank you. Then we have a question from Max Jones, which is actually also a question I was wondering. I was wondering, how does a lot of this go back to colonial history? But Max actually says, thank you for your paper. How far does Britain still have any influence in Sudan? The British elite was heavily invested in Sudan into the 1950s through the Sudan Political Service, but there seems to have been an extraordinary act of forgetting of this involvement among Britons, in marked contrast, for example, towards the ongoing nostalgia for the Reich and the Indian Empire.
I was in Oxford in February this year, and I met a British friend who was telling me that by chance he got a white paper from the Foreign Office listing 10 priority countries, and Sudan is not among those 10. So unfortunately, the UK is not really engaged in Sudan, and Sudan is not a priority country, especially during the Conservatives government. Maybe the Labour government is trying to do something. I don't know. But so far, I haven't really seen any significant thing from the British government. Of course, they invited the leader of Taqaddum last month to come to, or in October, to come to the UK, and all of that. And the UK also spearheaded the resolution that was vetoed by the Russians in the Security Council. So it seems that the UK is trying to engage, but so far what it's doing is not really enough.
And then we have a question. Do you think we will see more issues of xenophobia following Sudan's war? For example, issues in Egypt and other countries?
I don't know, but the way at least Egypt responded to the crisis in Sudan was, to me, quite surprising. And the manner that the Sudanese people are dealt with in Egypt is really very strange. I don't understand what's happening. The Sudanese who are in Egypt are, they are in a big prison. They cannot travel. They cannot leave Egypt, because if you leave, you will not be able to come back. Actually, I should have been to Egypt last week, because we are organizing an academic forum. I couldn't go because I applied for a visa 2 months ago, and as yet I'm waiting. So yeah, of course, there are a lot of restrictions for the Sudanese. During the first few months, some countries were welcoming, including the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Oman. But now they are making some restrictions. Egypt, of course, since June last year, made restrictions. Ethiopia is not good either. Chad is fine, but the conditions are quite difficult for people. I think Uganda is the country that is hailed for its welcoming policy when it comes to receiving people. And I was there 4 times actually since October 2023. I have family there in Uganda who are now refugees. And I think Uganda is a country that is really welcoming Sudanese, because for them, beyond beyond May 2023, every Sudanese is prima facie, which means that a Sudanese should not go through the screening or that rigorous interview done by the UNHCR, because every Sudanese is a potential refugee. So, but yes, there is sort of restrictions, and of course, forget about Europe. That is another story.
Then there's another sort of interesting question. What does either side winning may mean for the country?
Well, I am one of those who believes that neither SAF nor the Arab forces will win this war. At the end of the day, it will have to be negotiated. The history of Sudan tells us that there wasn't a single war that was fought and won by either the government or the other side. So at the end of the day, they will have to sit down. And I say, if this is the situation, then why not doing it right now? Now, hypothetically, if we say that let us assume that SAF wins, that is going to be a very disastrous military regime, and we will get back into the dark days of isolation, of repression, and all of that. I cannot think that the rebel support forces wins, but if they win, that is another disaster. These people are unable to do anything. In the areas that they occupy, they are doing nothing except looting and killing people. So I think what we should really look for is for war to end, and then we start a political process that will try to address all these problems that have gotten us into where we are now.
I take the next question. Thank you. Thank you for this insightful session. Are there any particular organizations who are most effectively aiding people affected by the crisis in Sudan? If we wanted to make a donation or otherwise support a genuinely effective NGO?
I think there are a lot of international NGOs now operating in Sudan. The Norwegian Refugee Council is one of them. I think Chr International, Mercy Corps. There are a lot of international organizations that are trying to, Médecins Sans Frontières, of course, they are there. And I think they are also working with, civil society organizations, although, as I said, the space is quite shrinking for this Sudanese civil society to operate. But there are NGOs that are trying to do work and to help the Sudanese people. including in areas that are occupied by the rebel support forces. I've spoken with one of my academic friends in Niala. He was telling me that there are a lot of NGOs, international NGOs, that are working there, supporting people. So there are always ways and means to provide support, and it's easy to get avenues to send financial support.
Thank you. And then another question relating to support. What role can the Department of Social Anthropology of the University of Khartoum play? Are you satisfied with the efforts academics of the University of Khartoum are exerting?
Well, sadly, the professors are scattered, and my humble guess is that around 70% of the staff members of the University of Khartoum are outside the country. Now, my department of social anthropology, I think only 3 members are inside the country. The rest of us are scattered in Egypt, South Sudan, Uganda, Europe.
Germany, France.
Precisely. So,
Norway.
so this is a very serious situation. Yeah. And even if this war stops today, I think we will have to continue teaching virtually and doing a lot of things virtually until such a time that people are able to get physically back. And under the circumstances, there are little things that we can do to contribute to stopping the war. My colleagues Musa and Tamir, who were working at the Peace Institute, are also now in Cairo, but they are trying to organize things, seminars, forums that address some of these issues, and that is what we try to do.
I have to say, I was also impressed by some of your colleagues, and I think, I mean, to the audience who maybe doesn't know so much about the University of Khartoum, and particularly its social anthropology department, I think it's really one of the best anthropology departments in Africa, because it has so many staff who got a PhD overseas but returned, and they have a lot of corporations, and they have super interesting programs where people can do actual research, also at bachelor and master's level and stuff. And I was quite impressed by some of the colleagues and some of the developments I've been following, how they actually have allowed master students to graduate with virtual vivas and virtual sort of teaching and stuff. So I think I'm really hugely impressed how much has been going on in this really difficult condition. And as you rightly say, once you become a refugee, also you have other things on your mind, not only your professional life, but you also need to look after yourself, your family, your loved ones, etc. And it becomes very difficult. So I'm actually hugely impressed, I have to say. The next question is, do you consider this to be a modern form of colonialization in Sudan, especially in light of the British embassy's intervention in negotiating the civilian army deal that led to the fragile civilian government?
Well, this is a difficult question, I must admit, but in a way, yes. In the context of fragile states, you have all these types of interventions, because when a country is in the situation of getting out of 30 years of dictatorship and isolation, all structures are weak, even if not completely destroyed. And then you have foreign actors coming in, trying to help, trying to support. Definitely, this is something that will affect the outcome of whatever thing that was on the table. So if we look at the transition during the first 3 years until the military coup of October 2021, there are a lot of interventions from the regional actors, from the IGAD, from the African Union, the Saudis, the UAE, the UK, and of course the US. All of them are and we also saw what was happening after the military coup. We had the so-called trilateral mechanism that was composed of the United Nations Integrated Mission for Assisting Transition in Sudan UNITAMS. We have the IGAD, we have the African Union, and we have the Quad, which was represented by the US, UK, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. All these different actors were meddling with the transition. And I must actually say that part of the mess we are into was the result of those type of interventions by the different actors, you know. You cannot have 4 blocks that are meddling with the internal politics of the country and you expect something good to come out of that.
Thank you. Then another, I think we had that in a different way, but maybe you want something to add. So the question is, Ukraine and Gaza have been all over the front pages of the press, but Sudan has had no such coverage. Why is it that we hear so little about this in the media?
I don't know, but this is not something limited to Sudan actually, but you know, in the global south, you know, things are neglected. Nobody is talking about what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo. You know, that is another forgotten war for I don't know how long, how many years. I even don't understand or don't know when the crisis in the Congo started. You know, so negligence and of course racism. I have to say this also because if you look at what's happening when the Ukraine war started in February 2021 or 2, I don't know, 2022, I think, the Ukrainians were received. You know, there are students from the global south who were trying to live with the Ukrainians and they were not accepted in many European countries. We have to say this, you know. So that is also part of the global politics that is much more concerned about the immediate vicinities than something that is far away, you know. But I think this is also part of the global north policy of, you know, keeping you know, what is called extending borders, you know, externalizing borders, you know, of just keeping not only migrants but also problems away from our borders. And I think that is part of the explanation of why we don't really see in the media what's happening in Sudan. We all see Gaza, we see Ukraine all the time in the news and all of that, and even in the forget about TV channels, but even in the newspapers, you know, digital or conventional, you really hardly see anything from Sudan.
So we have 2 more questions. One is a bit of a provocative one, probably. Do you think the humanitarian aid that you regarded as that you praised, you regarded as helpful, like when you were asked about organizations one might support, is not a step towards decolonialization? The anthropologist Mao says there is no such thing as a free gift. That's the question. I'm just.
Yeah, I think we need to differentiate between 2 things: humanitarian emergency aid and development aid that is conditioned. To me, the latter is the thing that we can consider a neocolonialism, you know, imposing some conditionalities on aid and that, but emergency relief that is meant to save lives, I don't think this has nothing or has anything to do with colonialism, because anyone can do that, you know. Whoever is able to bring food is welcome. I really don't care from where that food comes from. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Chad, US. When people are dying, then these questions, you know, are not relevant. But we can, of course, look at other types of aid that are extension to colonialism.
Thank you. I fully agree with that. And the last question, do you see hope for rebuilding a stable and just state in the near future? And what would this look like?
This is quite difficult because the level of destruction, even if we look just at the physical part of it, is really horrendous, you know. The damaged homes, you know, people who lost everything, you know, properties, everything they have, you know. This is something that takes ages to be rebuilt. But most importantly, the rift that has happened to the social fabric is even more serious. Now people are not trusting each other. People are accusing each other of being snitches, you know. People who have lived together for decades now don't trust each other because they accuse each other of telling the rapid support forces that, you know, this house has gold, this house has money, and all of that. It's really sad. So I think it takes a lot of time and effort to try to address this disaster, even if the war stops today.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. Are there any commentators, news outlet, or online sources you would recommend so we can stay informed in Britain?
I don't know, because there are just too many things happening. So there is something called Sudan War Monitor that is regularly, but that is very confined to SAF, Rapid Support Forces engagement, you know, battles, killings, this type of things. But for the other political processes that are parallel to the military front, I really don't know. I have no idea. There is Sudan Tribune, of course. It's one of the very trusted sources of information and news about Sudan. I think I recommend it. I highly recommend it. Sudan Tribune.
Thank you. I mean, if anybody else in the audience has any suggestions, they can also type it in the chat. But these were all the questions we did actually have. Now we have another one. It's again about, I will not take that question because I don't really think it brings us anyway. I mean, I can read it to you, but it's a follow-up of the colonialization question. Do you not believe humanitarian aid is a precursor to development aid, which in turn leads to colonialization? How do you separate them? Do you agree with me that it's a planned step towards achieving colonial goals? I mean, I actually think you have answered that quite powerfully, that if you are in need of emergency assistance, you don't really care where it comes from, but you might want to add any comment if you wish.
Yeah, I think that is, I could see the point. And as a matter of fact, I am now developing interest in the decolonization discourse. I'm actually preparing a project on decolonizing refugee studies. I'm trying to get money for that if I succeed. But the thing is that, yes, I could see the importance of these types of questions with the current discourse that we're having. And these things could be confronted or addressed by dovetailing whatever comes to the local realities and needs. As long as something is not imposed, it should be fine. It should come as a response to local realities, not as something that is imposed for people to accept. I think if we go by this, then we should not be too scared about the colonial bit of it. Of course, it's always there, but there are ways and means to deal with this and to confront this.
Thank you. These were all the questions that were posed in the chat. I don't know whether you want to say something at the end, more generally.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, and for the audience for posing all these very important and critical questions.
I also really want to thank our audience, and it was quite a big audience. It was more than 50 people altogether, which I think is very good. And I think a lot of people pose questions from a lot of different angles, which was really good. And yeah, let's see, no, nothing else. here. So it's, yeah, I mean, it was really a pleasure to have you, Professor Munzoul. So hopefully we will make another event happen in Manchester
Okay. I'm looking
in better
forward.
days when we might plan the future of Sudan in a more positive way and how it can avoid the trap of being recolonialized through aid or other outside interventions. And very good luck with your project on decolonializing sort of refugee studies that you mentioned. Maybe we can link up on that one day outside of this seminar.
Sure.
So thanks everybody. Thanks Andrew for organizing this, being in the background, and I think everybody might get a link to agree that this is going to be made publicly available, at least a part of the presentation. I don't know how HCRI will sort of organize that, but thanks to our audience. Have a good evening to everybody, and hopefully see you at some other HCRI event in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you very much.